excited that I get to bring this message to you. It's found in the Gospel of Luke, and it's chapter 6. We'll be looking at verses 46 through 49. And this is a message for those of us who have felt, feel, or might yet still feel that we are just on the verge of losing everything, that our lives could quickly collapse. I know I've gone through phases of my life where I've felt just like that, and that's only by God's grace, by God's help in my life, that everything just, no credit to me, all credit to Jesus, that he held my life together. And so it's an approach that I want to begin with, and with this passage and what we're talking about. One of the things that inside is a mystery to me in our nation and how intelligent our population is. So something that is ironic to me is the Millennial Tower in San Francisco. My thoughts are, how could that be? We have been building in San Francisco now for a couple hundred years. We have the greatest tools to discover what is underground. We know what is underground in San Francisco because a lot of it is we've put it there, and that's why it is the size that it is. Regardless, I cannot wrap my head around how you could build the largest building in San Francisco, the Millennial Tower, and have it start sinking. They put very wealthy people in this. Wealthy people bought very expensive units in this building. That's where Kevin Durant lives. That's where the Dropbox guy lives. There's one after the other after the other. And now the building is going, like, how? How could you do that? How? What? You know, and you just wonder, what on earth? And of course, right now they're doing what will help them most. They're suing each other. Oh, yeah, that's really going to get that little building, right? Now, I guess the bad news, the latest is that the tower is now at the very top, 58 floors, is now 14 inches leaning over. The people say that, you know, potted plants scoot down the floor at the top. Everything just goes to one side. The worst news about that is that less than a year ago, it was 12 inches. And so I look at that and I think, what on earth? Well, we all know because of the structure of it, we know what the problem is. The problem is the foundation. It's in the foundation. It's what's at the bottom of that thing. That's what's happening. That's what's moving. And so as it moves, things in the building begin to fall apart. So you begin now, not that the walls weren't built very well and strong, and with, you know, not that they don't have good quality windows, but they can't withstand the force of a shifting foundation. And as that foundation continually shifts, upstairs, everything above, everything that you see, everything that is visible, now you got big cracks in the building. A couple of weeks ago, at the top floors, they had a window bust out. And I tell you, it's something else. While the Millennial Tower is bad news, how many people are walking around with cracks appearing in their lives, with things falling apart, and they're just sitting there saying, oh, look, I have a crack in my wall. Look, I have a window that busted out, metaphorically, for your life. That's not the problem, people. The problem is, how is your foundation? What is shifting and what is non-existent in your own foundation? Those things wouldn't be happening if your foundation was strong, if your foundation was secure, if it was stable. Everything in your life would probably be a whole lot better. And so that's the question. How many people walk down that aisle of marriage and they've given very little consideration to the foundation of what their marriage is, or what the foundation of the person they're marrying is built on? But boy, you don't have to get too far out of the church on that Saturday morning or afternoon and before you begin to see, oh boy. So you begin blaming. Well, it's you, it's this and this and this. I don't know. Maybe, might not be, but I will tell you what it is. It's the foundation. It's what their lives are built on. It's what your marriage is built on. That's what starts to crack. That's what starts to break. It's because of that foundation. And because of our lack of a foundation, our very poor foundation, one of the problems that we begin seeing, or many problems we begin seeing, is problems in relationships, problems in self-identity and how you see yourself and how you understand yourself and what you see wrong in your life, and self-criticisms and children that don't speak to you anymore, and ambitions of putting all kinds of effort and work into accumulating, whether it be money or whether it be prestige or whether it be a reputation, and all of that is visible. Everybody looks at that and says, yeah, look at all that. The question is, what's it built on? What's it all resting on? What's it all sitting? What's it all dependent on? What's it all dependent on? There's your question. Where's that foundation? What's up with that? You know, I have had a phase of my life where I have lost several people that are close to me, sometimes relatives, sometimes friends. You go through phases like that in life where people unexpectedly pass away. Young people that you'd never kind of guess that was in the cards. And every single time when that happens, and I'm sure it's the same for you, the question comes back, what about my life? This life and death is so random. I really have very little control over how long I'm going to live on this life. So wonder if I got that disease. Wonder if I got into that accident and my life ended. What would they say at my funeral? How would I feel about the times I've lived here? Those are not how do I live questions per se. Those are what's my foundation? How have I lived this far? What have I done to secure the life that I do have, that which is visible to everybody else? And so that's what we want to talk about when our lives are falling apart. What is it that Jesus says about that? And so let's look here in Luke chapter 6, verse 46 through 49. And this is what it says. If you read along with me if you like. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Of course, this is Jesus speaking unto his disciples. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete. I want to bring your attention just back to the first two sentences. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, they are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. Let me tell you what. I kind of appreciate what Jesus said, and I'm kind of scared to death about what Jesus said. Because he said this a long time ago to a select group of people, but it's as if he were speaking to me right now. Greg, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? How many times do I go through my days, my weeks, my months, my years, where I know what the Lord has told me, and I know how the Lord wants me to do, but I don't do what he says? And it really causes me to have to ask myself, what is it that I do instead? Why is it that I do other things instead? Why don't I listen to what the Lord tells me to do, and I do that? And I have all kinds of reasons. A lot of the reasons have to do with pleasing other people. I don't want to let them down. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not on their team. I want to make it sound like I'm supportive of them. I want to make it sound like if somebody would ask me about something in my life, I could say, well, this is what I've done, and then have them approve of that. That's been a lot of the reasons that I have not done what the Lord has told me to do. I have all kinds of reasons. I think we all do. It's a very important question. Why do you say, Lord, Lord? Because Lord is a big deal. Maybe not in our world today. But boy, just we know enough about literature and history to know that when you call somebody Lord, that's a big deal. You're really subjected to them. You're really in deep submission to them. So when you call them Lord, Lord, you're placing them in a very high place of authority. But that's all you're doing, because you don't do what they say. All you do is pay lip service. Yeah, that's a really good idea. But you don't do what they say. How frustrating is that to the Lord? That way. But that's the call in our life. That's what Jesus is asking. He asks this question, and then he never answers it. I think the reason he doesn't answer it is because we have to answer that question. Why is it that I call him Lord, Lord, and don't do what he says to do? That comes back to me. Why is it? What is up with that hypocrisy? What is up with that contradiction there? Why? What is up with, what keeps me from doing that? And then Jesus goes on to say something very interesting in this passage about the foundation. The foundation being the rock that the guy dug down and laid the foundation on rock that we build our house on. And then he talks about the building of the house. And what's interesting to me in this passage about that rock that Jesus just makes it very stable is God builds on rock. That's what he builds on. He builds on rock. And a lot of us wish God would do something in our lives. And at the same time, the question is, have you given God a rock in your life to build on, or are you asking him to build on sand? Isn't that a good thought there? What on earth? God's looking at you and saying, I don't build bad buildings. I don't build millennial towers. I don't build towers in Pisa. I don't know what I do. I build good buildings. I build strong buildings. And to do that, I need some rock to build on. I need some rock. Today we use cement. That's what goes into our foundation. So in the same way you said, I need cement to build on. And to ask ourselves, have I given God a rock to build on? So what is the rock? What is the cement? Well, very simply, it's just exactly what Jesus says. He says, as everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. That is the mix. That's a cement mix for our foundation, is to come to Jesus, hear his words, and put his words into practice. That's the cement mix. That's the foundation. As you do what God asks you, what Jesus asks you to do personally, you are mixing cement and you are pouring an ever stronger foundation. The more you do what he says for you to do, the bigger the foundation gets. The bigger the foundation gets, the bigger the building he's going to put on that foundation. Sometimes we ask, well, why is my life so small? Because it's a very small spot, a speck of a foundation for him to build. He only builds on rock. That's what he builds on. And so we have to build a strong foundation. And it's interesting that it's not a belief, right? It's not just a learning. You can't go to a class and learn about a foundation and have a foundation. No, it's an action. It's a verb. So you have to do what God says. And as you do what God says, you are building a foundation. So there's a very good reason to do what Jesus says to do, because you are building a foundation for God to do something awesome on, for God to do something crazy good on. That's the reason we do what God asks us to do. And when we don't, when he has to ask, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then not do what I ask you to do? What he's saying is, I can't do much with you. I got to wait until you get that foundation going. And the good news is, it's not about the past. It's about today. Am I willing to start doing what God asks me to do? And we need a strong foundation because this world is crazy. This world is hard. When you build something in this world, the question is not, Homes and Gardens going to put me on their front cover? That is not the question. The question is the storm going to take me out? Is a storm going to take me out? Is an illness going to take me out? Is a bankruptcy going to take me out? Is a divorce going to take me out? Is this addiction going to take me out? When the storms hit, what you have as a life, the question is, how big is my foundation? How strong? Have I dug down and laid the foundation on the rock? Have I done that? That's the question, because inevitably the storms will come. Very often the storm comes in and annihilates our lives, completely destroys it, leaving nothing in its wake. Sometimes you and I have stories like that in our own lives. I lost everything. I've got nothing. It's all gone. That's not all bad. That's not all bad. You know why it's not all bad? Because when God comes in and allows a storm to hit our lives and to slide everything off and we lose everything, all of a sudden we now see what we're building on. We see the lack of the foundation, and we can go back and say, oh, I get it. I see. Sometimes that's a kindness of God, to expose the lack of foundation. We were just building on ground without a foundation. Now we can come back and begin building with that foundation. We can come back. You know, when God has his way and he's able to do what he wants to do in our lives, the results are just breathtaking. They're mind-blowing what God does. Let me go all the way back to Jesus' disciples, the followers of Jesus. There we go, 2,000 years ago in a tiny little community. People didn't travel. They literally did not travel. You could have traveled. It was one ginormous empire, you know, but people, generally, they did not travel. Most people were very poor, and they just kind of lived where. So it would not have been out of this, beyond any expectation, that Jesus' followers would never have traveled more than 30 miles away from their house. Isn't that amazing? 30 miles. What's that, Gilroy? Or, you know, San Mateo? Or, you know, what's 15 miles either way? I'm not good at directions, but I'm thinking, that's not far. And they probably didn't do that every day like some of you guys or we do. They probably did that once in a lifetime, right? And so these were people of a small community. These are people who every day went out to the lake to go fishing because they had to eat, and that was the source of their food. These are people who just lived. Talk about, you know, a local food source. Man, it's almost within reach, you know, of everything you ate and everything you lived and whoever you married. That probably wasn't all that great. And there it was, just all within reach, just right there. And look what happened to Jesus' disciples. After they learned to do what he said for them to do, and they did it, what happens? All of a sudden, everything just expands. And we have Peter, he goes to Italy. And he lives out the rest of his life ministering in Italy. You've got James who goes over to Turkey and to Asia. And you have Thomas who ends up in India. And you have John. And it's like, oh, James went to Spain. And then you have, it's just like everywhere. John is in Turkey. And you're like, my lands, these guys. These are uneducated little people, a small little contained world. And all of a sudden, Jesus' words gets into their heart. And all of a sudden, Jesus begins building a foundation, an awesome foundation, a big foundation. And it just begins changing. Whereas one time their lives are very contained. All of a sudden, their lives are expansive. Because why? Because of what Jesus is doing in their lives. Today, it's not so much of a distance for us, but it certainly is a mindset for us. A lot of times we live with a very small mindset, a very small mode of thinking in our lives, of understanding the world. And we can go a lot of places, and we bring that little teeny, can of peas with us called a brain, and that's all you got. That's all you got. But after you give your life to Jesus, after you start doing what he says to do, man, that thing just goes berserk and it just explodes. And it's like God is doing this and God is doing that, and he's leading you here, leading you there. Because God is desperate to use people who will actually do what he says for them to do. He loves that, and he can work through them to just absolutely change the world. How does he change the world? For one, he puts eternity in our hearts. So he says, hey, this is all leading somewhere. This isn't ending at your funeral. This is ending never. This is eternal in its nature. And this all works together for what I'm doing. The other thing God does is he brings an enormous quantity of love into our hearts. Just pours love, whether it be friends or family or people we meet at church, or love that God gives us for other people, other needy, whatever it is. But it sure doesn't come from within. It just flows into us from above. It's that love that God gives. It's that peace that literally people do not understand. How can you be peaceful under these circumstances? I don't know. All I know is that God gives me this peace, that Jesus has brought this peace into my life. It's that joy that I don't know. It's just joy because Jesus is at work in me. He's doing this in me. It's just a result of being right with Jesus. I cannot write 5 things to do to be joyful. All I know is that I stay right with the Lord. I stay right with Jesus, and joy flows into my life. And joy just permeates my life all over. And this house that Jesus builds on top of this large foundation, this great foundation, is what? This house that Jesus begins building is built according to his way. And it's Jesus building the house. It's Jesus building my life. You know, I've spent a lot of time not building Jesus' house. I spent a lot of time building my own house. I've spent some time, not everything I've built in my life has been out of love for Jesus. Sometimes I build things out of my own love and my own passion or my own goals or things like that. And sometimes I don't even build it out of my own. I end up building it out of things like anger. I build a life out of resentment, out of apathy, out of a bitterness. And you got to say, that doesn't make a good house to live in. It's not the kind of house Jesus built, that's for sure. But it's the kind of house that people who aren't doing what Jesus tells them to do, they end up building. And a lot of people, that's inevitable. They don't know any other way. You mean Jesus would actually build my life? That's news to them. They don't even consider. I don't know, I'd venture a guess that 85% of the people you interact with in this community and in the Bay Area, no, they might even reject that idea, but that's just so foreign to them that Jesus could actually build a great life for them. Man, that's our job, right? That's why we are a church, to share that good news, what Jesus can do in your life, how Jesus can change absolutely everything. And a lot of times I'll build my own house, and people build their own houses, and it's not even a house because you feel trapped in it. And it actually becomes a prison. And nobody likes living in something they can't get out of. But so many of us here in the Bay Area, that's exactly where we live. We live in a house that things built, people built, emotions built. Jesus didn't build it, but now we're trapped and we can't get out. And that's an awful feeling to be there. What I want to do, what I want our church to do, the hope that the followers of Jesus would do, is to build a life from Jesus, a life of love for Jesus. Be a life of obedience to Jesus. A life of what is God telling me to do? That's what I'm going to do. And let God build the house. Let God build the house. And when we look back over our lives, what is it I want to see? I want to see the house that Jesus built. I don't want to get to a point in my life where I say, I don't know what he did. I don't know. All I know is I messed this up. I messed that up. I tried my best here. And I can look back, but I never let Jesus build the house he wanted to build in my life. I want to be able to look back in my life and say, yep, that's the life that Jesus built. That's the house that Jesus built. That's the marriage that Jesus built. These are the children, my relationship with my kids that Jesus built. Yes, this is my work that begins to infringe in history and to move the gates of hell back. What that is, that's the house that Jesus built. That's what I want to look back in my life. And that's what I want to say, look what Jesus built. Look what Jesus built. That's the life. When I say, well, what do you mean the life Jesus built? What is, you hear Jesus. What exactly does that mean? There's not a whole lot of mystery to it. All of us have a Bible, and that's where it begins. It begins by reading your Bible on a daily basis, having time with God. And on the back of the bulletin, the ministry folder that you might have received, there's a list of Bible verses. You know, read the one that it says to read today. Today is the one that I just read to you guys. Read that every day. Spend 5 minutes. And then after that, spend 5 minutes listening to a Christian worship song. Not more than that, 5 minutes. And then after that, spend 5 minutes praying. Praying for yourself, praying for others. That's all you got to do, 5 minutes. And you know, you will begin to hear, as you read those Psalms, you'll begin to hear God speaking to you and pressing you and moving you and saying, hey, this is what I want. This is how I'm leading. There's other ways that we can hear God's voice, but I'll tell you, that's a good one. Coming to church every Sunday. Every Sunday, come to church. It's the rhythm that God created was in 14 days, you know, he was happy. No, it was 7 days. There's a natural rhythm that the world was created in. The seventh day is our day of rest. That's the day we come to give God our attention. So every Sunday, come to church. Spend this time in worship with God. Spend this time to listen to God's voice. And it's amazing the things I've heard God say to me in my heart, my spirit, by being here worshiping together with all of us. As I encourage you to listen for God's voice. Put yourself in a position, a posture where God is able to speak to us. And it's mostly through God's word, but also the Holy Spirit will tell us what he's trying to say to us personally through his word. So be open to it. Be open to that. And you know, a lot of this, it's just head knowledge. And that doesn't do anything. That's what Jesus was. Why do you say, Lord, Lord? Because you could say that in your head. But then you don't do what I tell you to do. That's the action. So that's what God is coming back to us and say, it can't just be head knowledge. You've got to put this into action. And so even if you might hear what God says to you, that's not it. Where it is when you do what God is telling you to do. That's where the it is. That's where it all rises and falls, is in the doing. That's what happens. I absolutely love that moment in our Red Letter Challenge where it shared that story about the dad who told the kid, go clean your room. And the kid went and thought about what his dad said and absolutely loved what his dad said. And studied it, thought about it, wrote it down a couple of times, memorized it. His dad came back and said, hey, you haven't cleaned your room yet. Well, never mind about that, Dad. But you know what you told me? Those were the most inspiring, beautiful words you ever spoke. I have parsed those words. I have memorized those words. I've shared those words. In fact, tonight I'm going to go meet with some friends and we're going to talk about your words. It's just awesome, Dad. That was so great. And the dad is sitting there, no. It wasn't about what I said. It was about what you were to do. That's where it was. And I love that story because it makes me feel so guilty. That's exactly it. That's exactly the point. That's right. You know, what could God do with the people of Israel if Moses didn't do anything? Moses, all the way through the story in the Jewish Bible, what he had to do? He had to lift his rod up out over that Red Sea. After he did that, after he did what God asked him to do, that's when the sea parted and they crossed on dry land. It was after Moses did what God told him to do. Same thing with Joshua and the Ark of the Covenant and to cross the Jordan River. And there's well, we can't cross this. And they just stood there. No, it wasn't until they put their foot into the river that the river stopped and they were able to go across that. With Jesus and Lazarus, raising Lazarus from the dead, same kind of a thing. Nothing was happening. Lazarus was not rising from the dead. It wasn't until Martha obeyed Jesus. And then when Martha obeyed Jesus, then Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And with Peter, he was out in that storm. And it was a blistering storm, a torrential storm. And here's Jesus, and he's walking on water. You would think that would be enough, right? You think that would be awesome. Look at Jesus walking on water. But then nothing happened in any of the lives of those in the boat, in the disciples. But Peter said, hey, I would like to walk on water. And then what did Jesus say? You got to get out of the boat. You got to get out of the boat. And Peter, I'm sure, and a million things would have gone through his mind, most of all fear, and nobody else has ever done this, and I know this isn't going to work, and this is going to be horrible. What does he do? He gets out of the boat when he starts walking. That's what he does. That's what he does. That's when when we take action, when we do what he tells us to do, that's when things begin to happen. What we did to save energy in our building, we have motion detected lights. So what that means is that these lights, they watch in a way, don't get too creepy by it, they watch what's going on in the room, a little radar kind of stuff. And when they see that nobody is moving, they say, well, nobody needs lights on, and they turn the lights off, and we save money. But if somebody goes into that room and walks or just walks into the room, all of a sudden there's some motion. What happens? Boom, those lights come on. Those lights come on. They didn't come on when the room was empty. They didn't come on when there was no motion in the room. The lights came on when somebody began to walk around. Now, the room had power to it. The room had lights. They were all well-functioning order. Everything was ready, and everything was waiting until somebody made some motion in that room. Can you imagine all that has been prepared and all that is ready, waiting for you to take action, ready for you to make a move, and then what God will fill you with, what God will expand your world with, when you take motion to do what he calls you to do. I have a funny little closing story here. When I was a kid, one of my favorite toys was Bozo the Clown punching bag. Now, if anybody is somewhere near my age, they had a Bozo the Clown punching bag. And they look kind of like this. And so what Bozo would do is, the idea is, you can't resist punching it, right? And so you come up and you punch it. And you punch it really good. Well, there we go. Well, it's on a step. Give the poor little guy a plant, right? Bam! Look at that. How hard do you want to hit this guy? Bam! And look what he does. He comes back up. Isn't that hilarious? Look at that. I'm going to punch him in the face. Bam! He goes all the way down, and he comes back up. Now, how many times can I hit this guy and have him come back up? 1,000,000. I can just punch and punch and punch and punch and punch. I'm kind of enjoying this. I don't know. That's Bozo. Look at that. Why? Why? Because it's very simple. Because at the bottom, at Bozo, at the bottom, is something very heavy. And up here is just mostly air. And so no matter how far I put Bozo up, that foundation is going to bring him back up. Huh? No matter how. And how much is that just like our lives? Life is hard. Life is rough. And people can hit you really hard in life. But if your foundation is right, if your foundation is that concrete that comes from doing what God asks you to do, what Jesus tells you to do, if that's your foundation, life can do whatever it wants to do to you. Sometimes it does that, right? Look at that. That's my own personal testimony. And that's what life does. But look at Bozo. He came right back up. He came right back up. It's in the foundation. And if your foundation is right, you're going to come back up. You're going to come back up. We're going to go into a moment here where I want to ask you to consider in your own life, what has Jesus asked you to do and you just haven't done it for 1,000,000 different reasons? Man, you're losing out. You're losing out on many, many different ways. Sometimes Jesus comes to us and says, the things that you're hoping for, they only come by prayer and fasting. There's some of that. What have you not been praying and fasting about, but yet you still wish would happen? What is God telling you to do? What is God telling you that, head knowledge isn't going to do nothing? That's nothing. You got to get out there and make it happen. So I'd like to just ask us as a church, as individuals, as people, consider your heart. What is God telling you? This is what you need to do. This is what I'm asking. I've been asking for a long time. Would you do it? Would you do it? Let's consider that. And may all of our answers be the same. Yes, I will do it. Yes, I will do it. I've delayed long enough. I've pushed back your blessings in my life long enough. I'm ready for what you have for me, the big life. I love that passage. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. John, what does it say? It says, if you do what I say, you love me. Those are the ones who do. Those who love me obey my commands. That's the Lord. So that's my question to you. Are you at this point in your life right now? Have you arrived to the day where you say, I'm ready, Lord, I'll do it? We have a few ways Archie's going to explain, but let that be the call of our heart and what we respond to this morning.